In today's episode of my podcast story, we have Tommy Serafinski, host of the Conservation and Science podcast. Tommy's show brings together leading scientists, conservationists, and environmentalists who are driving positive change for our planet's future. As an avid outdoor man and passionate environmentalist, Tommy has created a unique platform that bridges the gap between scientific research and everyday understanding of our natural world. His background combines hands-on outdoor experience with a scholarly approach to environmental topics from the biodiversity and rewilding to the complex ethics of hunting and fishing. Tommy's ability to translate complex environmental concepts into engaging conversations has made his podcast a valuable resource for anyone concerned about our planet. He's here to share his fascinating journey of building a podcast that connects humans more meaningfully with the natural world around. Could you tell us who you are and what's the name of your podcast and what your podcast is all about?
Yeah, sure. My name is Tommy Serafinski, and I'm the host of the podcast called Conservation and Science. And in that podcast, we take a deep dive into topics of ecology, conservation, and human wildlife interactions, which mainly means human wildlife conflict. And yeah, so I speak on the podcast with world class scientists and with practical conservationists, with people engaged, members of environmental NGOs, anyone who has practical or sometimes theoretical experience in wildlife and wildlife conservation, and like something that I call in this umbrella term human wildlife interactions, which is, hunting and fishing. That's one of it. But then, conservation is also falls under that umbrella.
Wow, wow, wow. Okay. Is your podcast audio only or audio and video?
No, the podcast is in audio and video version, and it is available on Spotify. And on YouTube, and from the start of this year, also on Spotify. Spotify also does video. It's not like this high production, fancy video with 6 camera shots. It's basically us speaking, to our computers most of the time. Or sometimes when I'm recording on the location, then we have a camera or 2 cameras when we basically have our face filmed. So it's not like a high production value, but you can basically look at us and see our facial expressions when we're talking about some of those things. But obviously, it is also available in audio version, audio only version. Audio is the same in both video and audio only. So whatever is your jam, you can watch it or listening.
Yeah. Has it always been video or it was something you switched on along the way?
I switched. So it was on YouTube since very beginning. Okay, so
Okay.
I started in 2016, I think, and it was in a video version. But back in that time, it was just like a flickering thing on the screen. And then around 2022, I started. So when I started at the very beginning, I was traveling with my recording equipment to meet my guests wherever they were. So that was video only. But I wanted to put it on YouTube basically to take advantage of the search. Right, YouTube has great search, and back in the days, the discovery and the search of the podcast app were even worse than they are today. So that's why I had it on YouTube, and because it had to be video, I had this like a thing that was just making it into video. But then around 2020, I started recording more over the internet. I started recording more, and even those episodes that I was recording on location, or people were coming to, we were meeting somewhere, I started recording video as well. And I go like, well, you know what, I have that video already. I can post that in the full video version, like I call it. So since 2020, it was like a proper video version with actual, our faces on the screen.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. A lot of us, the people are saying there are a lot of audio podcasts that are doing great, right? And people, one of the growth strategies, a lot of people tell a lot of people that are trying to start podcasts is you should be on YouTube and video. Would you say has that really been has YouTube really been a major like growth factor for the podcast, or
Yeah.
it's just there?
Well, so it's very It's very interesting. Let's put it that way. I think that overall, my YouTube numbers are about quarter of total downloads, right? So whatever you see, it's happening in a YouTube, you can multiply that by 4, and that's gonna be
Man,
rightly the number on the audio podcast.
wow.
However, on occasions, the episodes on YouTube are getting like 700, 1,000 downloads, and it's way more than the audio ones.
Yeah.
So I guess it depends on like how people like to watch it. This is how I like to frame. I don't like to frame it like like YouTube algorithm, because like really what the algorithm does is like it just follows what people do. And
Yeah.
so sometimes it happens that the episode on YouTube will get far more downloads than the ones on the audio only version. However, what's interesting now, I definitely see the spike in downloads on Spotify once I started publishing video on Spotify. It's
Oh, so it
definitely
appears a lot of persons were
I don't have
discovering you on
exact
YouTube,
number.
and then they'll
Uh,
go check you out on Spotify.
yeah. So starting this year, I started uploading it also video onto Spotify, right?
Yeah.
And I don't have solid numbers yet, because I'm not like obsessing over stats that I'm looking like every day on them. So
Yeah.
I'm running this since the start of this year, and I basically want to give it first quarter. So the first quarter is already up, and then I'm gonna pull the numbers and see like exactly how many percent it's more. But I already that just that by the casual look at the numbers, I see that there is some spike from what is going on Spotify. Now it's hard to say, right? Because when you put it on Spotify, then Spotify will use that audio as your audio only version as well. So those
Yeah.
stats are dropping off your hosting provider stats, right? So
Yeah.
you look at your hosting provider stats, and like for me, majority of listeners were from Spotify. It was about 40-50% was on Spotify. So you look at your stats and your hosting up, and it's like, oh my god, you half of your views is gone, but now you have them
Yeah.
somewhere else. You have them on Spotify, so it's
Yeah.
awkward. But like I said, I think I'm gonna give it maybe another month till the end of April, and I'm gonna kind of like put all the numbers together, and that should give me good idea how much of a boost video on Spotify gave. But I think like casually just looking at it, I think it's gonna be at least about, I don't know, 15-20%.
If you don't mind me asking, what hosting provider do you use?
Captivate.
Oh, Captivate is one of those and this I don't use Captivate. This is not an ad or a sponsorship or anything,
Mhm.
but Captivate is one of those hosting providers that I kind of like their pricing plans. It's there for everyone, whether you're beginner or advanced. You can take, especially if you have a lot of podcasts, you get to benefit from it. And it's only when you start growing that's when you get to pay a lot compared to the other hosting companies.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like for me, the killer feature was dynamic audio insertion. So you can
Yeah, yeah. That's the reason
so
why I'm
so
constraining them.
yeah, but now now with like when you move to Spotify, and that's gone, right? Because you can't use it
Yeah, yeah.
anymore. So it's like,
Oh, yeah. Even if you do dynamic audio insertion, it's not going to show on your episodes because you are uploading video to. Oh,
yeah,
wow. Wow.
precisely. So this is it's a hard. I'm curious. How industry going to react, and to this changing landscape. I wrote a few blogs on Medium. So I actually writing on Medium about podcasting. So if people want to look me up, Tommy Serafinski on Medium, there's a few articles, and I wrote an article about how Spotify is effectively killing open podcasting.
Yeah.
And like what does it mean? There's a good and bad about it, but
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, the market eventually will decide. That's just the thing.
yeah.
Yeah. Spotify is trying to be like YouTube, and there's a reason YouTube is what it is. Well, who,
Hmm.
who am I? Who am I to give business advice? So at the end of the day, time will tell. So we just have to wait and see.
Exactly, we'll
Yeah.
see how
Yeah.
it's play out. Yep.
Yeah. Could you tell me about the real reason you started your podcast?
Sorry, say again.
Could you tell me about the real reason you started your podcast?
When I started podcasting.
Do you like the reason you started your podcast?
Oh, the reason. Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry. Listen, the reason it's a funny story. As you can probably tell by my accent, I'm not native English speaker.
No,
I came
neither
from
am
Poland.
I. Neither am I. No, no, that's not a
Yeah,
problem now.
there
Neither
you
am I.
go. There you go. Two foreign nationals speaking English. So I'm originally from Poland, and
Yeah.
when I was in Poland, I had a blog. I had a blog about fishing, right?
Okay.
And as I moved to Ireland, I continue fishing and I continue post on that blog, and I had a quite good following. These were the old times where you could
Yeah.
get really like a organic. So for example, I wrote a
Yeah.
blog about fishing on the Shannon River in Ireland. And so when you type in Google Shannon River, my blog was on the first place in Google, right? These
Yeah.
were the times. These were
Those
obviously it was
those
because
the good old days.
the good old days, right? Obviously, that was because my blog was on Blogger, and Blogger was owned by Google. That's why it was
Yeah.
surfacing on the first place. But that's a different story, right? So anyway, I moved to Ireland from Poland to Ireland. I started doing stuff here, and I was thinking like, you know what? It will be cool to do something in English language because blog was in Polish, obviously.
Yeah.
So I said, yeah, like my circles of my colleagues and acquaintances were all English speaking, so it'll be cool to do something in English. But obviously writing in English is more difficult than speaking, like in a second language, right? Writing is more difficult always than speaking. So the podcast was like a natural fit. I said, let's do the podcast. And I started the podcast and I thought it's gonna be like, oh, I'm gonna be talking with my fishing buddies about how the trip was and like stuff like that. Like people who will listen to like first episodes, that will see that this is a little bit like that. And by the way, I don't want anyone listening to those first episodes, right? But
Ah.
as that was developing, it all started with there was a discussion on social media about tagging fish. Like when you catch a fish and you put a tag in it, and for the research. And there were some people who were saying like, no, this is just basically doesn't do any good, and you just damaging the fish and whatever. And then some people like, no, this is like a scientific data. And it was a program called Sea Monitor, and I contacted them and said like, hey, you're running this scientific program when you're tagging fish, would you like to come on the podcast and talk about it? And they
Yeah.
said like, yeah, sure. So we've done that episode. And when we finish recording, they go like, you know what? We have all these work packages and we have more scientists. Would you be interested to do podcast with them? And I said like, yeah, sure. Why not? So then I started doing this, and that was like took off. Like people really enjoyed it, and I figured like, yeah, this is what people want to listen to, and this is what I enjoy a lot. So in the early days, the podcast was called Tommy's Outdoors. And so I started doing those episodes with
Wait.
scientists,
What did you call it just? Tommy Cell.
Tommy's Outdoors. So originally it was called Tommy's Outdoors, right?
Wow.
And as I started doing those episodes with scientists and more science oriented, I changed the name to Conservation and Science, because that more reflects what the show was about.
Yeah.
And that's how it ended up what it is, where we are like a full-blown conservation science, nature restoration, nature conservation, habitat protection, social political aspects of conservation. This is what we do. This is what we is me. This is what I do, and talk
Yeah.
with my guests.
Yeah. Like I like the fact that now that you're speaking, everything connects and everything makes sense. But when you just said it was more like kind of like an expression for you to like work on your English as a foreign speaker, and then
Mhm.
you started with fishing, and then from fishing now you're doing conservation and science. Like
Mhm.
when you started, you didn't have it all figured out, but you just like went with the flow, and
Mhm. Yeah,
now
yeah, yeah.
you have the topic clearly figured out. I think that's one of the major problem everybody's struggling when they start a podcast is this content market fit. Yeah, they
Mm-hmm.
have a countless things they could possibly be talking about. I mean, you're interested in fishing, but the other things you're interested in that you could also talk about on the podcast,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
But they're like, what should I talk about these? They tell you do the things you love. And for most people, they love a lot of things, not just one thing. So that's kind of like a hassle. I think
Mm-hmm.
the best advice is just start and you figure it out along the way.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and this is this thing that they call creator fit, and like I always like a skeptical about all the podcasting coaches and gurus and all that, because and all that talk about monetization and all that, like I think like if you want to run a podcast as a business, you need to approach this as a business. You need to have a business model. You need to know who your customers are, what you're going to charge them, and what for you're going to charge them, and do this as a business from start to finish, from day one. And
Yeah.
that means that at some point, you might not enjoy it anymore, or at least you might not enjoy it as much, right?
Yeah.
You're running the risk of this becoming a chore. While when you have like a good creator fit, meaning you're just enjoying what you do, and like I sincerely enjoy what I do. That's why I'm doing this for 10 years, right? Because I have an opportunity to speak with all those scientists. I had on the podcast the guy who is researching polar bears for 40 years.
My God.
He's like a top tier, top of the world, best in the world scientist in the researching polar bears. I would never had an opportunity to speak with him about polar bears ever, right? What do I do? Call him
Yeah.
up. It's like, hey, dude, did you want to talk with
Yeah.
me
I
for
want to
an
talk
hour
about
about?
polar bears.
Yeah, yeah. Like, whoa, Jesus, what's that weird? Like, well, I contact him as a podcast. Like, hey, I would like
Yeah.
to,
I have a podcast. Yeah.
yeah, and he goes like, yeah, sure, let's do it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's such a huge opportunity,
Yeah.
and there's this other thing, like then you don't have this pressure, and of course, you want to start monetizing at some point, at least to get your, not to get rich or anything like that, but at least to cover the cost of your hosting of whatever you do. But as long as that comes second, and you first and foremost doing what you like and what you're enjoying, you're gonna be successful, and you're going to be doing that for a long time. And
Yeah.
it's like in podcasting, there is a lot of this speak about pod fade, right? All people starting and then they stopping at the time. Yeah, because there's a poor creator fit. They're not enjoying
Yeah.
that. They're not enjoying
Yeah.
that really what they do. So that's exactly, and wisdom. You hone on it perfectly. I just enjoy this. It drives me. And if like for the first number of years, the podcast was like, €2,000 in the hole year on year.
Oh.
Once you go, all the licenses, all the, Adobe license, you take a hosting license and the website, and
Man.
then, right. And then you take all your, petrol, diesel, whatever cost that you travel to get to the people, and also the cost of opportunity, right? Like when you go somewhere and you're recording podcast for 2 or 3 hours, you're not doing something else. So
You could
that's
be doing
also
something else. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess that's my advice, or maybe not advice, but it's kind of like my take on this. Like, first you need to get it with a creator fit.
Hey, just a quick break. If you enjoying the insights so far and want even more behind the scenes ideas, inspiration, and tools for growing your own podcast, join my email list at mypodcaststory.com/join. That is mypodcaststory.com/join. You get access to helpful resources, exclusive updates, and the kind of stuff I only share with my email subscribers. Whether you're starting out or already podcasting, there's something valuable waiting for you. Head over to mypodcaststory.com/join and subscribe. Now, back to the episode.
If you enjoy what you
Yeah.
do, you like what you do, you're gonna be successful eventually.
Yeah, like recently I've been thinking there's something I've been thinking about is the fact that I know I'll come back to this creator fit we're talking about. But something I've been reasoning recently is those guys that are local podcasters, man, oh man, those guys are genius. Like honestly, because I feel like if you're a local podcaster and you podcast, let's say by your city, no, city is quite big. I don't know. Let's say I don't. The word I would use will be different from every country. Every country like to call their small. I don't know what the word is. It I could use no, not local government. Maybe, but you understand what I mean by local, like I don't want to use city. Okay, let's say town. Yeah, let's say you have a podcast for a specific town. It might look really small, but that what that will do eventually is that you get to be a local champion. Everybody will just know you because at the end of the day, you end up interviewing all the local business, all the local NGOs, all the local, basically everybody. You talk to them on your podcast, and that way everybody gets to know you. You get to build relationships and contact with these people, which in a way it's very very nice. I see that you
Yeah.
done on your video recently.
Yeah. I was just wondering,
Yeah.
like, whether it's like those. Sorry about that.
Yeah. No problem. I would have loved to do video, but the thing is, where I am, my network is not very strong.
Yeah.
So if I switch onto video, I've had terrible experiences. Like I'm
Yeah.
struggling
Yeah.
with like 2 MB per seconds
Uh huh.
band, but once we switch onto video, the bandwidth is just so high. But the audio,
Yeah.
we're doing KB, so
Yeah.
it's way
Yeah.
different. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, so so I was talking about local podcasters, and as much as it's I like any if I see anybody that's okay, I want to build relationship, I want to create awareness around my community. I'm like, just like a local podcast, you get to like speak to everybody around your local community, and you get to build relationships. And I can't really, relationship is not exactly something you go into and say, okay, what do I tend to get? That's like the wrong mindset. But building relationship is one of the really really powerful things, especially when you're building it with the right kind of people.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, and then earlier on we talked about creator feeds. I feel that we talk we you made mention of pod feed. I feel like the biggest problem is that people they don't they go into podcasting with the mindset that they figured it out of what they probably possibly be talking about. I think the better mindset would be I'll just keep doing this while I keep looking at okay how what I like doing. You understand? Like the moment when you started doing these episodes with this scientists, this conservation scientists, you realize that wow, this is the. I know I started the podcast talking about fishing with my buddies, but no, this is the stuff. This is it.
Exactly.
I just
Yeah.
found it, and then you're like,
Exactly.
okay, no, let's move from Tommy sells doors to conservation and science.
Yeah, and that you're touch on a very important aspect of it as well. That don't be afraid to pivot a little bit. Don't be afraid to change things a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's just like I said. And there's another thing that you mentioned earlier, that you need to figure out what it is. And that podcast, it was not my first podcast. I also had
Ooh.
I also had a podcast in Polish language, which I probably have done like 40 episodes, which was basically to figure out how to do the podcast. I knew I'm not gonna keep doing it.
Yeah.
But I, just learn how to set up your gear, learn how to record, learn how to talk to people, learn how to invite people on the podcast, and like do those things. So that was the one podcast, and I enjoyed, and it was like a discussion about everything and nothing, but it was fun. And then with that, I started this podcast, which was Tommy's Outdoors first, and then changed to Conservation Science. Somewhere in the middle, we also have done a podcast with my friend in Oxfordshire, who the podcast is titled "Have You Ever Considered?" And it's like a seasonal podcast. So we've done season 1, 10 episodes where we talked about like a societal issues, where we were talking about, for example, plant-based diet, or have you considered fly. So the title was "Have You Ever Considered?" Right? So each
Yeah.
episode was titled like "Have you ever considered eating less meat?" or "Have you ever considered flying less?" or "Have you ever considered da da da?" And
Yeah.
we were approaching this from the perspective of advocate and a critic. So we were starting from like, let's say topic of flying, right? And so I had we had this like a pod names, right? So I was like a Tommy frequent flyer, and I was just like, no, we should fly because this and that and something else, right? And my buddy William, he was like a William, not fly. William walks a lot or something like that, and he was going like,
Yeah.
no, we shouldn't fly because this, that, and something. So we were presenting like extreme points of view.
Yeah.
And then, so there was like a 2 segments, and then in the 3rd segment, we were sort of ourselves, right? And it's like, okay, how can we find like a middle ground? Where is the
Yeah.
middle ground really, right? It's like you
Yeah.
cannot really do one extreme or another. And so we've
Yeah.
done 10 episodes like that. That's a season 1. We might do season 2 even of this podcast, but it's just like a fun thing to experiment with the medium of podcasting. Once you have your tool set, your process, you kind of like know what you're doing.
Yeah, I like the concept of the podcast. Like, I mean, podcasting basically, it's you can mold it into anything you want. You at the
Hmm.
end of the day, you're the creator, you're the owner, and you're in charge, kind of.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I like the example you gave of your Polish podcast. A lot of persons will see that podcast and they'll say, "Whoa, this podcast feed. The guy just stopped podcasting after 40 episodes." But they don't get to see that the goal of the podcast originally was, let
Yeah.
me learn how to podcast, and you succeeded. You learned that, and you're doing your other podcast now, which is going on to 10 years.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we might certain things we'll see from the outside world. I'm like, the guy quit after 40 episodes and you are
Hmm.
not seeing the full picture. You're like, no, dude, that wasn't the goal of the
Yeah.
podcast. The goal was to learn how to podcast and start podcasting, which I
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I learned a ton, and I already had an equipment, and I already knew what works, what doesn't. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. The next part I'm going to ask you now, it's what's your most ridiculous or most embarrassing mistake or experience you've had with podcasting?
Like most embarrassing, like I don't know if it's embarrassing, because mistakes are, like what I say about mistakes, like mistakes will happen, and what really matters is like how you handle the mistake, not because like everybody will make a mistake. So for me, it was, I I had a guest who was a quite high profile guest,
Yeah.
and he was quite high profile among listeners of my podcast, and I was really honored that he accepted, and we recorded the podcast. And after recording the podcast, I figured, like, I've done a really poor job. I didn't really ask some of the questions that I wanted to ask. I
Yeah.
didn't respond to his thing, his answers in a way I feel like I should responded, and like how my listeners would expect me to respond. So like technically was nothing wrong with the podcast. Everything was perfectly recorded and everything, but I just
Yeah.
wasn't happy with my performance as a host. And I messaged him again and I said, like, hey, listen, sorry for that. Would you do this again with me?
Wow.
Because and he agreed. And he
Oh,
agreed. And
really?
we had again, and we recorded the podcast again, and that was the version that was published. And that was huge learning for me, because like, oh, will you like not publish this episode, or will you publish something that you're not happy with? And and because he was like such a high profile guy, it was like, wow, would he ever agree to do it second, right? I was like, wow, he agreed to come on my podcast. That was big deal.
Yeah.
And now I'm gonna ask him to do it
To come
again.
on the podcast again.
Yeah. And I did. And he said,
Yeah.
like, yeah, sure, no problem. And
Yeah.
we ended up being, I'm not saying friends, but we are still in touch, we're still in contact.
Yeah.
And we've done another podcast since. And he's writing books, and he even sent me a book for like a review to say, like, hey, read the book, tell me what you think about it. So we kind of like developed this relation, but it
Yeah.
started from me doing poor job and admitting to him that I think I did a poor job and I want to do it again. So I think that's I wouldn't say it's embarrassing. It was embarrassing at the time for me to talk to him again, but overall I think that was a mistake that I make, an error. But it was like a huge learning from this, and I think that anyone who listens to this podcast, your subtitle is like how audio is made. So that's exactly how it's made. You sometimes fuck up. Sorry, you can beep it out if you clean audio, right? You sometimes
Yeah.
screw up, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and and then you just own it. You just own your screw up, and you go
Yeah.
and you do what you think you should do. And that was, so I think that was interesting.
Yeah, like, I mean, example story you just shared. A lot of times, oftentimes we play both parties, right? When we're in the station, right? This is not just podcasting, right? We play both parties. You play yourself, and you also play the guest. We're like, okay,
Mhm.
if I ask the guest, he's going to refuse. You've not even asked the guest yet. You are assuming that he's going to refuse and say no. Like, dude,
Mhm.
can you for once just be you and allow the guests to be themselves? Ask them. If they refuse, good. If they don't refuse, great. But don't like assume that, okay, because there are a lot of assumptions that we're like, oh, if I tell him, he's not gonna agree, he's gonna refuse, he's gonna say this, he's gonna say that, and honestly, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Like, look, listen, the number of people, who either never responded or declined or just gave some, some bullshit excuse, that's that. I think that like people declining your invitation is just a part of it. And at no point anyone should, that should stop them. And like I always say that I am particularly grateful to, again, some fairly high profile people in the conservation space who came on my podcast in the early days, like episode 19, like episode 20. I was nobody. Nobody knew my podcast, and I was asking people who were, like a campaigning officers or directors in environmental NGOs, and 90% of them said yes, of course. And I'm saying, like, I'm forever grateful for them believing in me, believing in what we do, and agreeing to those things. And so, anyone who listens to that and is wondering, like, man, go for it. Like, the worst that can happen, they say no, or they're not gonna reply to your email. In which case,
yeah,
you send one more asking whether they get it, and if they don't
yeah,
reply this time around, just leave
yeah,
it
yeah,
and
move on,
go
yeah,
for a next one. Yeah,
yeah.
but
I mean, we this I'm just going to put this out there, but we podcasters, creators, and content creators at large, we have a luxury, right, where we are opportuned, we are given the opportunity to overthink the things we do, because I'm like, the job we do is not that, it's not a dangerous kind of job where you have to like second think and overthink what you do, like compared to, let's say you're on the battlefield and you're like, okay, if I advance, maybe the enemy will catch me and maybe they will shoot and send a bullet through my head or something like that.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
this is a guess, you know. And there are people, basically, there are actual people who they are on the front lines right now, where any single
hmm,
move they make is life defining move, like literally life
yes,
defining. Yeah, but podcast,
yes,
you're just reaching out to guess, and if you guess says no, life goes on, moves on,
yeah,
no big deal,
exactly,
right?
exactly.
Sometimes that's why I remind myself, like, I'm like, dude, this is it's not as big as you think it is. It's just a guess. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
life goes on.
exactly,
Like, yeah,
exactly, exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
like, I mean, recently, I've been, for those that don't know, I got to reach out to Tommy via Podmatch, and what I've been doing recently is I've been looking at my conversion rate. So I'm like, okay, maybe because I have a background in mathematics, and maybe that's why I'm approaching things like this. I'm like, okay, how many messages do I need to send in order to get one guest to book and come on my podcast? And it appears I have to
Hmm.
send. Yeah. Okay. I think recently it was 17%. Okay, that's so
Hmm.
I need to send 10 messages to get one guest to book. So each of those
Yep.
10 messages is not like, oh, I'm wasting my time, they're not responding. I'm like, no, no, this is how it's done. You have to send 20 before you can get one. That's
Yeah,
how.
you're
Yeah.
exploring. You're
Yeah.
exploring. Like
Yeah.
it's just the way it goes. Just the
Yeah, I
way it
mean,
goes.
it's the approach. Honestly, for me, it's most persons. The funny thing is that, well, most persons, our mind is just designed to look for the things we lose, the things we don't get to gain. I mean, you just mentioned that you get a lot of high profile clients and sorry, not clients, guests. I know why I'm using clients, but a lot of high profile guests on your podcast, and that for me is a great win, because I
Yeah.
know as much as possible that for the person to be high profile and to be in something that you love, and in an industry and a niche that you really really love, it means a lot to you. And
Yeah.
apart from the fact that you're doing a podcast, it means a lot to you for you to talk to them for like 1 or 2 hours. I don't know how long your podcast is, but
Mhm.
we don't look at that. We're like, okay, I reached out to so and so and so and so, and they refused it. I'm like, dude, yeah, they refused it, but what about the guys that accepted? So are we
Yeah.
just gonna discount those guys and say they don't matter because these guys refused?
And look, you know what? Like, I think that the longest, it was over 2 years. I was chasing a guest. It was a guy. I was messaging him, and I sent him message. And I sent him email, and he didn't respond. And then maybe year later, I found his profile. No, sorry, I messaged him on social media first, right? Like on
Yeah,
Instagram or whatever, and he didn't respond. And then a year later, I found his email and I emailed him, like a long, not that long,
Yeah,
but like a
a
polite,
long epistle.
professional email. And he didn't even reply to that email, right? And
Yeah.
I followed up. He didn't reply to that email, and then on social media again, and I think that I commented on this, and I just like, hey, I would love to have you on the podcast, whatever. And he goes like, yeah, sure, let's do it.
Wow.
And yeah, and it turned out that he didn't receive my first message, and then the second one
Wow.
like was something, and eventually, and I was like, hey, this is like a probably the record, because it was like 3 years almost in the making, that episode as well. And so that's another thing, the
Yeah.
fact
Yeah.
that you
Sometimes we have
didn't
to
get, like,
put ourselves
unless
in
someone
the perspective of the
replies to
guest.
you straight away. But sometimes they reply like, hey, I'm very busy right now. I'm about to publish this paper, or I'm in the middle of an academic year, or I'm doing something, and they decline, or well, that's fine. Message them in the 6 month time. Message them year later. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
maybe this time you'll do it. And that was not like that. It was almost 3 years, so that was the longest. But I routinely have guests on the podcast that I chase for 8 months, year and a half, because they can't do it, or they didn't responded, or something. And just like, don't be like annoying, but leave
Yeah.
them for 6 months, 8 months, and try again. And
Yeah.
you
I mean,
eventually might get who you want. So that's another
yeah.
advice.
I mean, we shouldn't be selfish. Like, I know we wanted them to come on podcast, but at least sometimes, we have to like put ourselves in their shoes. Like, some of these persons don't even know what a podcast is. Some of them, they don't really understand how that's, how that even comes. Like, his podcast is not
Mm-hmm.
exactly something that, that delights them. And sometimes, and I am going to say this, podcast hosts, they make it hard for podcast guests to come on their podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, like they make it hard. Like, honestly, sometimes you're like, okay, you have my
Yeah,
my
yeah,
my
yeah.
my
It's,
podcast studio is
that's also like a part of what you learn, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a reason why we are called the podcast host, and they are the guests. There's a reason why.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
That's a
we're meant
very that's a very good
to make things
observationalism. Yeah.
easy for them, and host them very easily compared to having them stress and
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it's not nice.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. And
yeah.
like you're also like, what I do also, I have like a FAQ document that I'm sending out, explaining things about the show, how long the show is gonna take, how I like them to set up their computer, like things like that, which puts them into comfort. So I'm sending an email, and the email is always like a very personal, and I say like, hey, by the way, I'm attaching FAQ document about my show, and
Yeah,
it should answer most of your questions, and it's like a friendly
yeah,
document that's like, hey, this is what we do,
yeah,
you know and that puts people at ease, and because sometimes it's like, oh Jesus, I don't know what is it going to be, and you don't want to put all of that in the email as well, right? Because
yeah.
someone just opens an email and see like a three-page
My
long email, and it goes
God,
like, oh Jesus, I don't have
they will
time for
just
that,
run out.
right? Right. So you do like a quick email introduction. Here it is. This is what I do. I would like to invite you to the podcast. Here's the link to my calendar or whatever. And oh, by the way,
Yeah,
I'm attaching a document that explains everything about the show, the format of the show, what preparation is needed, yada 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 yada. And then they
yeah,
say like, well, no, you're just passing that the first filter, like okay, I want to engage with this guy, and whenever they have time, they read the document. It's like, oh yeah, I can do it. Or maybe they say like, no, I won't do it, and that's fine too.
yeah. And then something thank you for sharing that FAQ. That probably that would be something I'll add to my email. But the reason why I've not even bothered adding it is because I have a profile on Podmatch, and a lot of the times when people check my profile on Podmatch, it gets to answer most of their questions. So, but it's something I'll do because I know that I will have to start reaching out to other podcasters and not just people on Podmatch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes what I've been thinking is that sometimes certain guests legitimately cannot make it on your podcast, but they could refer you to someone who could come on your podcast.
It was such a lovely conversation with Tommy. And if
if you love to connect or learn more about Tommy, you can go to tommysoutdoors.com. That's tommysoutdoors.com. I'll put the link in the description. And you can also listen to his podcast at Conservation and Science. You can search for it anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. That's it for today's episode of my podcast story. I am Wisdom Okonkwo, and I hope this conversation sparked new ideas and gave you a deeper look into the heart of podcasting. If you've loved this episode, consider supporting the show by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/wisdomhq. Every bit helps keep the stories going. And hey, don't forget to follow, rate, and share this podcast with another podcaster or creator who would find it helpful. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode.